Hello and welcome to the Play Creators Conference and the No Characters, No Vehicles, No Problem panel session. And we're very lucky today that I'm joined by three people who've got very substantial and wide-ranging experience of the world of licensing. I should introduce myself. I'm Ian Downs from Start Licensing and I'm acting as the chair for this panel. So today we're joined by Karp, who's the SVP of Global Brand Licensing at BuzzFeed. We're also joined by Stephanie Freeman, who's Chief Brand Officer at TSBA Group, who are an agency who represent brands such as Transport for London, The Open, and the National Portrait Gallery. And we're also joined by Lee Allentuck from Raising Nerd Branding and Licensing, and he leads the brand licensing push for the Britannica and Merriam-Webster brands. So I just also say my kind of experience and background is that I've worked in licensing for far too long, probably 25 years plus. And lots of that has been with toy and game companies. So the point of this conversation really is to sort of engage with the licensing world and how the licensing world in turn engages with the toy inventor and creator kind of groups, and how they approach it, how the kind of communication goes, and what the opportunities are for now and for the future. So as a first kickoff, I was just going to ask if I might start with Stephanie, if perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about your kind of current role, how you get involved with the toy industry, and what TSBA kind of does as an agency, really.
Sure. So as Ian's already said, we represent brands such as Transport for London, The Open, Formula E, National Portrait Gallery. So very much we would class as corporate style brands, with some sports brands in there as well. We like to say that we specialise as a boutique agency in brands like this, in the sense of not traditional entertainment brands. So we always like to try and think outside the box to get those brands into the sort of licensing space that they want to. And normally these types of brands are coming to us saying they want to be in the mass retail outlets. And so we do have to think a little differently as to how we are going to do that. My position within TSBA, I used to head up TSBA in the sense of the head of licensing, looking after all the staff. Really doing a lot of admin. I've managed to pass that on to Joe Edwards, and I now actually do a lot more sort of new business development, finding new brands that we can work with. But personally, I also have long-standing relationships with a lot of the toy licensees, the sort of larger corporations like Lego, Mattel, Hasbro, etc. So I still have very much hands-on dealings with the toy side of all of our brands that we work with. But obviously our brands have a breadth of licensees, and I can talk about that a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. And Eric, if you could just tell us a little bit more about your current role and maybe some of your prior experience, because I know that you have been involved in licensing over a number of years and obviously worked with a lot of toy and game co's along the way.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So as you mentioned, I'm the head of consumer products brand licensing for BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed is the world's biggest publisher of digital content. We are Facebook's largest publisher. We're number one on Snapchat Discover and on Instagram Stories, and we have 3 of YouTube's most visited entertainment channels. So we're a huge digital publisher. We publish about 600 pieces of content a day, which is about 200,000 pieces of content a year. And those fall into distinct verticals. Some of it's lighthearted fare that BuzzFeed was originally known for, like lists and quizzes. Some of it's hard-hitting investigative journalism. BuzzFeed News is known for that, both in the US and in the UK. Predominantly. And then we have lifestyle verticals, content that lives in different areas of people's interests and affiliations. And that's where we've done the deepest dive thus far in brand licensing and consumer products. Historically, you asked a pointed question. what have I done in the past? I've done, as you said, I've been in licensing for a while now, and I've been only on the brand ownership side. I've worked in film, television, publishing, video games, so browser-based and apps, and also brand. And so digital publishing was new to me 3 years ago, but all of our work currently is in the lifestyle space. With those previous positions, toys were a natural category for us. With BuzzFeed, and I can explain this further later, toys aren't central to any of our verticals. However, it's a category that's quite near and dear to our overall audience. And so the products that we've launched in this space are a direct response to those interests.
Okay, thank you. And Lee, perhaps if you could just tell us a little bit about your agency and your involvement with which brands you're kind of working on. And I think kind of the viewers will really sort of understand the different kind of experience and opportunities that we're able to talk about today.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you for having me. I actually come from inside the toy and game world. I started at Hasbro Games, managing global brands and doing inbound licensing. So bringing many of the entertainment properties and partnerships that we've had with studios onto our popular games, whether it's Monopoly or it's Game of Life, and so forth. And so I grew out of that world of product development with branding and licensing, and then left there and managed the Americas for Lego and doing outbound licensing. So sort of switching the role and really taking our brand and putting it on other experiences outside of the plastic brick. Anything from apparel to publishing to hard goods, lights and things like that, gifting and stationery. And so it was really about the idea of how do you get the fan base that loves and cherishes the brand to feel and experience the brand in other areas of their lives, so that they can express their love for the brand and their creativity and so forth. Currently, I started Raising Nerd, or RN branding and licensing, with the idea that I would take those experiences and help other companies, either whether it's licensing or taking their brand into different areas and experiences. And so I'm working with Merriam-Webster, which has been around for 185 years, and Britannica for 250 years, really focusing on their expertise in knowledge and understanding and curiosity, and taking that trusted authority on language and history, as well as the thousands of other categories and subjects that they have, and the expert contributions that they have, and really seeing finding ways of taking that trust and that following that they've developed over centuries, and turning them into other opportunities for fans of knowledge and curiosity to show off their love for it. So whether it's in toys and games, whether it's in apparel or other areas, it's really about tapping into that love and thirst for knowledge in a broad global fan base.
Okay, thank you. I mean, from my kind of own experience, traditionally it's very easy to sort of pigeonhole the relationship between licensing companies, licensing agencies, and toy and game manufacturers, publishers, and indeed creators and developers. It's very easy to pigeonhole it as it's all about kids brands, or it's all about TV brands, or it's all about films. So given the sort of brands that you guys work on and represent, how have you sort of found easy or difficult to kind of engage in the first place with toy companies about your brand? So maybe if I put that to Stephanie first, and then we'll go around and take a view from everyone on that.
I'd actually say it's not been that difficult. Normally it's just thinking outside the box and finding something that either we feel would translate well into a toy-based product, or it's thinking about another way of sort of addressing the opportunity. So to give an example, with Formula E and Extreme E, you could very easily say, well, there's a car, so we can just turn that into a toy car. However, why is anybody going to buy that product compared to a Formula One product or another car product? And so we try and think about what is the sort of USP for that. And certainly for those two brands, it's about sustainability, ethical sourcing, carbon neutral living, all this type of stuff. And obviously that's really key things that are in the, just in general around everybody's thinking at the moment. And so it's either we go and talk to a retailer and try and sort of bring it from the retail back to the product, or we go and talk to toy companies, developers, etc., to sort of get an idea as to what we could do using that as the sort of linchpin into the product. Similarly with something like Transport for London, where obviously it's not about sustainability, and again, you've got trains and you've got buses, but again, it's trying to think about what the play theme is for that brand. And so we look at ways in which we can try and engage the children, or whatever age group we're trying to go for, and then sort of think again outside the box. It certainly helps when you're talking to numerous people and numerous companies, because again, it's about finding out what the retailer is looking for. And by talking to all these different types of companies, you start to form pictures in your mind as to how you can actually take this. So I'm not going to say that it's always our idea and we come up with it. It is definitely down to many individuals and many different companies. And realistically, it is obviously what the end consumer wants, but it's thinking about what that end consumer wants and then working back to say, okay, so if they want X, how can we get X out of the brand that we've got? And the good thing about things like Transport for London and many brands out there, there's so many assets associated to them. And sometimes it's not the clear asset that people always think about that really actually translates into a toy product. So
okay.
That's okay.
I think we'll go to Eric in a moment, but I think it's interesting that maybe one thing we can look at next is also how you've been able to present to the game companies, the toy companies, and perhaps how we kind of think about how we present to the inventors as well. But Eric, I know that you've done some kind of licensing in the toy and game sector recently with BuzzFeed. So perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about that and what the experience has been.
Yeah, we have, Ian. So BuzzFeed's a data-driven company. And by that I mean our content is viewed about 9 billion times a month. And we have a team of data scientists who comb through that data looking for signal, looking into the interests and proclivities of the folks who are consuming our content. And then on top of that, we do a lot of insight testing to see if our audience is interested in products A through Z, whether that's apparel or food and beverage or toys and games. So before we even started conversations with any major games companies, and games are the place where we said we can plant a flag and we can win. We did all sorts of insight testing. We found that the BuzzFeed audience is extremely interested in analog games. In addition to digital games, in addition to video games, they're interested in party games. They're interested in games that they can play around a table that bring them together. So we brought that insight testing, and in addition to that, an intent to purchase based on products based on the BuzzFeed master brand or on Tasty, our culinary brand. We brought those insights to the different games companies, the games manufacturers and publishers, to make the case that while we can't use these insights to guarantee success, we can mitigate a lot of the risk by proving that our audience is extremely interested in these products. And so we found the right manufacturer, and they're a product first company. And it's a great marriage. A product first company and a data first company means that you're going to get best possible product, and you've mitigated as many of the risks as you possibly can to bring those products to market. And yet one last piece of the equation, to build on what Stephanie was talking about, even though we're a digital company and we embrace e-commerce in a big way, we brick and mortar retail is incredibly important to us. We understand that that's not going away. It's the retail is transforming right now, but brick and mortar isn't going away. And it was important for us, for the launch of the first BuzzFeed Games products, to have one retail destination, brick and mortar as well as .com, where we could launch those products.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. And Lee, as someone who, as you said in your introduction, you've kind of worked for a toy co, and you're now representing rights. When you're talking about things which, in general sense, we're kind of calling non-traditional rights for toy companies, game companies, what's been your sort of experience and insight of how best to present those and engage with those toy companies?
Yeah, I completely agree with Eric. I think when you look at the toy companies and sort of the noise in the marketplace that you're competing with, even though you may not be going after the same audience, there's only so much on that shelf space that a toy or game company can acquire, right? So the data that you can provide that tells them that this is not only a low risk opportunity, but you bring an audience to the table with you. It's really, really hard to compete with the next Star Wars movie or the next, Pixar movie or whatever, because there's so much money, so much publicity that goes into those. And they take over the store, they take over the internet. And so if you can bring along the data that shows you have an audience, that you understand who they are and their interests, and you can provide an experience that taps into that, you're more likely to have an opportunity to actually get not only a game made, but actually put on shelf and moving, through the, driving revenue and so forth. So it's those the ability to prove that you have an audience, that you have an experience that they want, but also that you can help market it for them. So as Eric and Stephanie were saying, is that they have audiences, they have built-in audiences with their crowd, and so do my clients. How do you tap into that? How do you drive that creatively without sort of the hard sell, but get them excited about those new experiences that maybe they weren't expecting, but still feels natural to your brands.
And just sticking with you, Lee, and we'll ask Eric and Stephanie the same question. How important do you think it is when, I suppose, initially talking to the toy and game companies themselves, and then maybe thinking about the inventor community, which we'll come on to talk about a bit more, how important is it to go with a fixed idea when you walk into a toy company's HQ and you're kind of presenting one of your properties? Do you present it as a property generally, or do you go in there with a defined idea for a toy and game product?
Yeah, it's the magic question, right? Is do you come to them with a full package ready to go, or do you let them have some creative elements to it as well? And I think it's you kind of have to know, the toy manufacturer quite a bit. I've done it both ways. I've hired inventors to take our brand and create a cool game or a toy that we believe we can get behind it, but still leaving it open enough that the creative designers at these companies can still feel like they have an ownership in it and they have a stake in the game. I think the key thing is really understanding the toy company or the game company that you're talking to. Know who their audience is, know where their strategy is. If you're bringing them a tabletop action game and they're really into RPG or strategy games, it's not a good mix. You really need to know what they are and who they're about before you present to them. And so I've done it, as I said, I've done it both ways, where I've brought in a game concept, or I've seen maybe there's a co-brand opportunity with them, that they have a brand that would fit very nicely and dovetail into our brand, and we can help raise both boats. So you really need to, the answer is, yes and yes, but you really need to know who you're talking to and know what they're looking for.
Okay, thank you. And Eric, in your sort of recent experience, has it been a case of you've kind of waited for people to approach you from the toy and game community, or have you kind of, as it were, you talked about your knowledge of your audience? You've obviously investigated that and interrogated that, and is that what's encouraged you to go out and talk to the toy community with kind of preset ideas, as it were?
It's less preset ideas around the finished product than it is about preset ideas around our ability to possibly succeed in that segment, right? So when we come to any manufacturer in any segment, whether that's toy and game or food and beverage or any category, we do some heavy lifting up front to show them our seriousness and to show them that that we have an understanding of our audience and that we've done some of the work. But at the end of the day, we're going to rely on the expertise of not just the manufacturer, who have absolute expertise in the design and manufacturing of the games, and the inventors that they rely on, but also, and this, I think this can't be overstated, we want to make sure that we're talking to the buyer early enough in the process and getting an understanding from her or him, what are those white spaces within their set and what are those pain points within their set. If we're not manufacturing something that's designed to help solve things for that buyer, then we may as well not even engage in the exercise, because ultimately they know the customer best.
And Stephanie, from your point of view and some of the brands that you work on, obviously you know, or you have access to quite a lot of data about the consumers and the audiences. Taking on from Eric's point, how much of that do you use when you're kind of going to the toy companies with your ideas? Do you sort of give them that level of insight into the audiences that are associated with the brands, and then that maybe kicks you on to look at particular product ideas? Is that something, I mean, certainly as someone who's worked in licensing for probably 25, 30 years, when I first started working in licensing, it was very much show people an image of a character and a deal would follow. But to me, from what Eric and Lee are saying now and my own experience, there's much more of a interrogation of your brand before you get a deal. And I just wondered how that's kind of impacted your experience, really.
Yeah, funny you say what you've had in experience, because similarly, I've been in the industry now for 20 years, and I've seen similarly, you started 20 years ago with just a picture and someone would take it, but then we went through the phase of everything was around about what stats was it on television, or when was it on at the movies, and what numbers did that do? And then we've kind of come through that now, and it's almost no one cares about television anymore. It's about how is it consumed through, whether it be YouTube or some form of social media and other tablet-based, basically, ways of looking at a brand. It's really kind of, it's not even gone full circle. It's completely changed, certainly the way we all pitch brands. I think going back to what you'd said about my brands, however, it differs. So if you look at something like TFL, I really wouldn't use the numbers to go to a retailer or a toy company or anything like that, because the numbers that I have for TFL are who rides the tube every day and which is the most popular station, for instance. We might use that in terms of actually giving that to a game developer, because they may say, oh, actually Waterloo, it's one of the most popular stations, so let's use that in the game. However, to the actual end consumer, it's everybody knows what the tube is and the underground, and so realistically, I'm not needing to sell that. I'm needing to come up with a concept that end person would actually want to buy into. And it doesn't matter about how many people travel on it. Is that game interesting to that person, and would they want to play it?
Okay, thank you. And thinking we've touched on it a little bit, I think you've all in different ways mentioned game developers, toy inventors, and so on. So Lee, thinking about your sort of experience and background and looking at it from a licensing company point of view, do you think licensing companies could be doing more to kind of build a dialogue with the toy inventing community? And if the answer is yes, how would you sort of advise the licensing agents and licensors to kind of foster those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of the inventors community. I've been involved with them for, gosh, well over a decade, and some of my closest colleagues are actually in this industry. So a lot of the innovation, new ideas, and early concepts come out of that community. I think if it's, from a couple perspectives, I think it's actually very good to open up that door and get to know the ones that are, that are have had success in the industry and pitching ideas and bringing new ideas to the industry. My caution is that once you open that door, it's like Pandora's box. You best be prepared to get an onslaught of calls and constant pitches, which is great, and it's energetic and it's fun. But it's a business, and these people are super creative, and they're relying on selling their ideas. And so, if you open the door, just be prepared to have a process of how you evaluate the games or the toy concepts. Be prepared to invest in them or partner with them to bring it to a toy company and say, here's the idea, we like it, we would be willing to put our name on it, and that's going to somehow impact your royalty because you have to split the royalty with the inventor. But yeah, I think it's a fantastic place to get new ideas, to broaden your brands and open up your network. I think if you're going to do it, just be prepared. As it is a business. It's not just going shopping for new ideas. It's really these people are professionals, and they do a fantastic job at delivering.
Okay, thank you. And Eric, do you sort of go out there to try and develop kind of links with that kind of inventor community, or is it? As Lee described, I think you've kind of got to have a process of how you engage with that community, so that the process is managed and expectations are managed on both sides. I mean, is it something that you actively look to cultivate, or is it something you use in a strategic way?
No, we don't. We don't feel that particular responsibility falls on our shoulders. But it's no secret within the industry which toy companies and which games companies rely heavily on inventors and outside ideas, and respect those folks and reward them. We know the names of those companies, and those are the companies that we want to work with because they value outside ideas. In the same way that that BuzzFeed, and think there's a good analogy here, we value user-generated content. There are great ideas that are outside the four walls of our company, and we want to work with other companies who value the fact that there are fantastic ideas that don't necessarily spring from people who are employed by them.
Thank you. And Stephanie, sort of developing that point a little bit, I suppose, as somebody who, I think recently you've worked, I believe, with Gibson's Games, haven't you, with TFL, who are a long-standing licensee. What sort of advice would you, I guess, give to maybe start-up companies that are new to licensing, who might want to knock on your door and say, we're really interested in working on an idea with Formula E? What would you say they should be thinking about in terms of how they present themselves to you as a viable and attractive partner?
Yeah, so I would say the way that Gibson has worked has been really well, and I'd use that as a sort of analogy as to how we'd want people to approach us. The Gibson work with inventors and ideas to create the games. So again, it's similar to what Eric was saying. We don't manage that part of the process because we just don't have the manpower to do that, or the expertise really. So we rely heavily on the game companies to do that. And with Gibson, they did that. They wanted to tiptoe into the market. And again, that's a very normal way of doing it. And I'd actually say that's the best way of doing it, really. Get something of an idea that you think would work with a company like Gibson Games. So there's a whole host of companies out there who are just like them, who are willing to support, willing to give these people a chance. Once we've got that game, put it into the market, we can then help from our perspective with the marketing side of it. And that's where obviously our expertise of the brand comes in, and that's why there needs to be a good connection with the brand game. We, with Gibson, have then gone sort of not full circle, but we've gone to the point now where the game was doing so well, we started talking to Gibson about, okay, what else can we do? Because you're doing so well with Mind the Gap. we've got some other opportunities. We could also give you some other opportunities that are currently with other licensees that they're not really doing a lot with. And that's where things start to expand further. They wanted to look at new opportunities, and they spoke to another toy inventor, and now they're launching, or just launched, the Ride the Rails. And through lockdown, because of exactly what Eric was saying earlier about the whole board game community and how parents want to be home now playing board games with their kids are certainly finding it a little bit more interactive as well. But yeah, that's certainly grown massively certainly for Gibson. But yeah, I'd say my advice would be just get connected with as many toy companies as possible, but don't be afraid to come to us directly, because we can always point these people in the right direction as well. Not trying to just pass them off and get rid of them. We're trying to help them by saying, you could contact this company or that.
Okay, thank you. And Lee, thinking about your kind of wider toy and game experience, and again, looking at the licensing side, are there categories in toy and games that you think licensing hasn't really kind of succeeded, that perhaps there are some opportunities that they should be targeting their rights to, that perhaps, you know, maybe inventors can help them kind of break into those categories?
You know, games is very broad. So you have everything from puzzles all the way up to preschool, all the way up to, you know, tabletop excitement, you know, type games, action games. And then you have your strategy and RPG games. So, you know, it's so broad, and trying to find new ideas and new experiences in games is really always a challenge. So from a branding perspective and a licensing perspective, games is always going to be a great place to play in. Other categories that you can think about, I think, you know, I think dolls and stuffed animals plush is always a great place for some brands. It really also depends on, you know, if it's character driven or if it's not, right? And since this category is really about non-character driven, my opinion is games are a great place to be. We're looking at construction and finding opportunities there and so forth. So yeah, it's this one particular area. I would go back to what Eric said, is really look at the data, look at where your fan base is, where to focus, where, you know, it seems like a natural experience, what they lean into, and really sort of develop it from there. It's really about what the end user wants versus which category we should actually go after.
Okay, thank you. And Eric, thinking about the toy market, and obviously we've talked, and Stephanie's used the example of TFL, which at face value you might think is very local UK, but actually obviously it is literally a global brand that travels because people are aware of it. But do you feel you're in a better position to engage with the toy and game manufacturers and companies if you have a global brand? Is the industry going more global, or is that not quite right, and is there still local opportunities for people as well?
Oh, good question. I think it's kind of a blend, and it depends on the category and the subcategory, right? The usual analysis is if you can cover the 7 biggest markets with your brand, you know, there's your 90-10 rule. Look, it's always helpful to have a brand that's global, the scale of Avengers, but I think there's important business to be made regionally and locally.
Okay. And Stephanie, obviously from your experience, you're obviously based in the UK, but you work on brands that are kind of have an international reach and international appeal. I mean, when you set out, do you kind of look at multi-territory opportunities, or you're just looking for the opportunity that suits the market best? So in the case of TFL, would that be more of a kind of a local UK opportunity, or do you see the toy and game opportunity as one of your global opportunities?
We always try for global. It's always worth the try, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And sort of what Eric was saying as well, it's you kind of have to look at it both ways. You can look at the main territories where your brand might be the most well known, but realistically you have to go with what the end consumer wants. And funnily enough, with TFL, the games that we've actually done, although they do have global rights, the majority of sales do come from the UK on that. And it's realistically more lifestyle product that does better in other territories than the toys and games. Toys and games does get picked up by souvenir from the tourists coming into the UK and obviously taking that home, but I think the desire of something like that in their own territory isn't as prolific. So, yeah, just.
Okay, and thinking again, really to sort of give some insight to the toy inventor community, Lee. In your experience, having worked in a toy co and now representing brands, and I accept there's never kind of a definitive answer to these kind of questions, but broadly speaking, how far ahead are you planning? So obviously we're in very challenging times at the moment, but I guess you're looking a year or 2 years ahead in your planning, and those kind of companies, the inventor community needs to be aware that they're fitting into your brand plan as well, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, the toy and game industry is notoriously slow in development and getting to market. You know, it's usually a 2-year development cycle. And if you're fortunate enough to work for a company that can move faster, you can jump on trends and things like that. But it's not only a challenge to get product out fast, but it's also to drive innovation and you know, it's typically not a first to market sort of early adopter industry. For us, we work about 2 years out. In some developments, you know, you can get them down to 18 months to a year, but you really have to have something ready to go, and it does not take a ton of development. Analog games, right? If it's just paper and just cardboard, you can get them out pretty quickly. Card games and puzzles, you can get them out pretty quickly. But if you're talking about very integrated strategy games or games with lots of rules or even plastic pieces and things like that, it does take a while to get it out there.
Okay, thank you. And Eric, I'm going to come to you first and put you on the spot, and the other guys probably got a bit more time to think, but thinking outside of your own kind of properties and your own direct experience recently, have there been some examples of other, what we would call loosely non-traditional brands that you think have been well deployed into the toy and game area? So are there kind of lessons that we can learn from other people's experience? I mean, from my side, I've much admired kind of what Lego have done in terms of, you start off as a construction toy, and then obviously through non-toy and game licensing, they turned it into a lifestyle brand. But even within the toy and game space, they've done a lot of kind of innovation and development that's not necessarily core construction. So I wondered if there's been anything that you've seen recently that you admire. And as I say, I apologize for putting you on the spot on that one. Stephanie and Lee have got a bit of thinking time, but yeah, is there anything that pops into your mind about that?
Well, I'll talk very slowly to give my colleagues as much time as possible. So firstly, I don't think you can help but have immense admiration for the work of the folks from Billund. The Lego brand has expanded into so many different categories with such excellence and attention to detail, right? But they wouldn't have been the brand or the segment that I would have pointed out. Look, again, we have a retail first attitude or focus as an organization, and so the first BuzzFeed game that we launched, called Listicles, is now exclusively at Target in the U.S. And it'll make its way around the world to appropriate markets. But the first place we launched was at Target, and in the U.S., from a game standpoint, they're without question number one in the segment. And so I wouldn't necessarily give a tip of the hat to any brand, but I would give a deep bow to the folks over at that organization for becoming the destination for casual and party and kids games as well. I think they're giving excellent feedback to all sorts of toy companies and games manufacturers, and listening to them and understanding from them where they believe the ball is going to be going in a quarter or 2 quarters or 3 quarters is probably good advice for anybody who wants to win in this space.
Okay, thank you. And Stephanie, you've had a slightly more thinking time. Are there any examples that are coming to mind?
The cogs have been turning. And it's always the way of, I can't think of one. Without sort of, again, naming names, because I don't, nothing is massively springing to mind. So I think it's worth saying, I know there's a few companies out there who are prioritizing the sustainability route. And I'd say that from my perspective, they're the ones who are challenging what's out there. And it's a very difficult space to move into from a toy perspective. It's certainly something that we are working on. And yes, our friends from Lego are definitely doing that, but also there's numerous others, and that's why I didn't want to sort of start naming names. I'd either get one wrong or I'd forget someone, and then someone would get upset. But that would be my.
I mean, that's a useful insight anyway about that. I think we all need to be more aware of the trends and the opportunities in areas like sustainability and how that can impact what we're doing. And in fact, who knows, that might throw up a whole new host of brands that perhaps previously had been kind of overlooked or not necessarily considered relevant to licensing. So I think that's a very good and apt observation for today. Lee, from your point of view, as a guy that's worked so long in the toy and game industry, you must have seen a few kind of, that's a positive, not a negative.
That was a shot there.
I've probably worked in it longer, so don't worry about that. But are there any examples that spring to mind for you?
Yeah, going back to the Lego example, having worked on that licensing strategy over the last 8 years and helping to develop it, what I think is sort of the lesson learned from it is being true to the core business and the core fan. When I joined Lego licensing, we had I think 135 global partners on board, and discovered that probably sort of 80% of them were not in line with the brand and not really doing us any favors. And we cut it down to, I think, very quickly about 30 or so brand partners, and found that we improved our product quality, we improved the revenue and the amount of time and resources we put towards it, and created better products that were more in line with the brand, that both the internal audiences and the owner family and the fan base appreciated it. But to go back to your question, there's a number of different brands. I've always been impressed with BuzzFeed, not to throw too much applause over to Eric, but I love what they've done with the Tasty brand, and being someone who likes cooking, I think that it was quite brilliant to cross over into actually creating products that fit within that brand that people can use every day. I think that Pantone has done a fantastic job with a brand that is known for colors, and working with a brand that's known for words that anybody can use. Pantone has colors that anybody can use, and so creating experiences for that brand is fantastic. But most of all, I think during this pandemic, and people really are looking for connections and way to feel like they have somebody on the other end of an experience, and finding ways of connecting is really, I think, the trend that I would love to see more of. And you're starting to see it with games. You're starting to see it with Zoom games. And every Sunday I get together with my extended family and we do Zoom games, and just so we can stay connected because we can't visit each other. I think that's going to be hugely and critically important over the next 5 to 10 years, how this generation and the next generation are going to find ways of connecting. And the brands that can do that in a very seamless, fun, engaging way that is not forced, I think is going to be a successful brand. And I think the world will appreciate that as well.
Okay, thank you. And so moving to a final question for everyone, and taking on board what Lee was saying. I know we're all in very difficult and strange times, but if you had to sort of give an optimistic note to, I guess, our colleagues in the toy and game industry and the licensing industry, what sort of, would you give like one single kind of trend or piece of advice, or just a suggestion that to kind of use a racing parlance, that you might mark their card for the next 6 months, 12 months with a piece of advice or a bit of encouragement in terms of where we might be looking for some future opportunities? I'll maybe throw that one first to Stephanie, if I may. So.
I can't just use one word for what I want to say, so I'll just use.
I never use one word. Don't apologise for
using. I use one when you can use many. I would actually say, through this pandemic, the one category that's kept me busy and kept me constantly, whether it be approvals, new opportunities, has been the toy and game category. And so therefore it's not dead, it is well and truly alive. There are so many opportunities out there, and realistically people just need to get in touch and reach out, because there's nothing to be scared about. Yes, retail is backed up with stock at the moment, but they're not necessarily backed up with stock of toys and games, because certainly our toys and games licensees were struggling to keep up with the demand. So there's opportunities out there. Just go for it. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. Life's too short.
Yeah, thank you. And Eric, and it doesn't have to be one word, of course.
Oh, look, I say this a lot to colleagues and friends. We're of course all going to get through this pandemic, and the one thing that we can rely on with humans is that they will go back to prior patterns of behavior and probably learn nothing from the process. So that's not a negative. That means that there are rosy days ahead, and that we can expect the same sort of, I think, energetic marketplace that we enjoyed from 2015 to 2018. It will come back. Okay,
that's good, and I'm pleased that you have that optimistic outlook. And Lee, from your side, is there any kind of beyond that? Do you have maybe a trend or another piece of advice that you would call out to people at this point?
I do agree that it's going to come back, and we're all going to get through this. But I think it's going to be different to some extent, in a positive way. I think we're going to be stronger. We're going to find new ways of connecting. But I also think we're going to, like I said before, is that connecting with people is going to be so critically important. And you'll see this sort of as things get better, everybody's going to rush to the bars, or everyone's going to rush to the movies and events and things like that, and that's great. But I think they're going to rush back to play games and sit together and interact and find ways of doing it. So to kind of echo both what Eric and Stephanie have both said, is that the games business, the toys business, are so critical for so many reasons, whether it's teaching and learning and filling kids and adults with excitement and creativity. This business is a must-have in our world and our society. So, yeah, my advice is just keep innovating, keep driving, and finding new ways of instilling that playfulness in our lives, because we need it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'd say that's probably a nice point to kind of conclude our conversation. And Lee, Eric and Stephanie, thank you very much, and thanks on behalf of Mojo Nation and the Play Creators Festival. It's been a great chat to be part of, and to listen to your kind of insights, wisdom and advice, and I look forward to catching up with you all again in person as soon as we can. But thank you, and take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.